Welcome to Your Legislators, a production of KRWG Broadcasting. Your Legislators is a public service program providing our viewing and listening audiences in southern New Mexico the opportunity to hear about important legislative issues directly from their elected representatives in Santa Fe. Now here is your host, Jared Andersen.
Welcome to Your Legislators, also being broadcast on KRWG 90.7 FM Las Cruces. I'm Jared Andersen with this week's guest via satellite from Santa Fe, Representative Antonio Lujan from New Mexico's 35th District. Representative Lujan, welcome to the program.
Thank you and good morning.
Good morning. Representative Lujan, I'd like to first start off by talking about the nuclear power plant situation in Japan. You serve on the state's Radioactive and Hazardous Material Committee, and I'm wondering how you feel the fallout from what's happening in Japan could affect potential nuclear development here in New Mexico.
Well, in New Mexico, I don't know that anyone is anticipating putting in any kind of nuclear plants. However, my concern with just the whole issue of nuclear power has been the waste, and we haven't found an adequate way to dispose of the waste, and that's been my concern all along. And this issue in Japan is just a wake-up call of what we could be facing. In California, for example, there are two reactors that are within fault lines that could go by the wayside. Some seismologists are saying that the next big one could be the San Andres fault, and it would affect at least one or possibly two reactors there.
What are some of the specific concerns you have with getting rid of the waste here in New Mexico?
Well, we have the waste isolation pilot project, but that's what it is. It's a pilot project. It's not a permanent solution for all the waste that we have. I don't feel that we have the capacity to take in all and it was supposed to be a low-level waste, and now they're trying to get approval for higher level waste, but I don't think that we have the capacity to store all of the waste in the WIP site near Carlsbad. And Mesa Flats, of course, is out of the equation now, which was their next alternative.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's move on now, and let's talk about the budget. How do you feel about the House budget proposal, and also how do you feel about possible spending cuts to state social programs?
Well, as you probably know, I serve on the Appropriations Committee. And it was quite difficult to come up with a budget. We don't have much wiggle room. The Senate is working on it. They were up till 1:30 last night, and I think they have pretty much worked most of the wrinkles out of it. But it's an austere budget, and with our hands tied because there is no interest in raising revenues, and we had to just work with the limited resources that we had, and had to make some very tough choices. And unfortunately, it's the working people are the ones, especially the lower income working people, are the ones that are going to be affected the most.
Do you feel like raising taxes is an option that should have been discussed more?
I think that it's an option which this administration I think, is philosophically averse to. But I feel that we have a social contract to take care of our most vulnerable populations, and we're not doing that. We're giving subsidies to industries in hopes that they will come in, and I'm not opposed to that, but at the same time, everyone has to share the sacrifice. I think you can trace this back to 2003 when Governor Richardson gave that a huge tax cut for the higher income. If that had not taken place, we wouldn't have the budget problems that we have right now.
Mm-hmm. Are there any specific items that you're worried could be cut too deeply?
I believe that we're very vulnerable with Medicaid. I think that we're looking at unemployment. The fund is rapidly being depleted. Health care is a major issue that we haven't been able to get our hands around. It's still controversial, and a lot of people are subject to the misinformation that's been out there, and so there are hardly any really serious proposals on the table that would address the cost containment for health care, the accessibility for health care, and how we're going to deal with the 22% of uninsured New Mexicans.
Mm-hmm. Is there anything you're looking at that you're comfortable cutting, you feel should be cut?
I don't know that. I think that we have to really take a look at the waste, and I think that there may be quite a bit of duplication. We need to take a hard look at the state contracts that we have and see where we can really become more efficient in what we're doing. I don't believe in across-the-board cuts because I just feel that that's not a good approach to establish public policy. But we need to take a look at the waste first. But it seems that this administration, while it came in talking about jobs, has changed its agenda, and unfortunately, in my opinion, is still on a campaign mode rather than on a governance mode, and has been using wedge issues to try to divide us as opposed to trying to bring us together and make efforts to improve the economy and get people to work.
You talked about creating jobs, improving the economy. There's a bill that's being looked at that would give tax incentives to first-year businesses. Is that an idea you support?
I would support it. I'd have to take a look at the specifics of it. I'm not that familiar with it. The people that are in the Taxation and Revenue Committee deal with those kind of bills, and we haven't debated it on the floor. So I'm not that familiar with it, but I'm certainly for incentives to create jobs, but those incentives need to be for corporations that are committed to being good corporate citizens and not just taking advantage of the state's taxpayers' money and using up the money and run. A good example of that was the proliferation of call centers that for a while, where they would use up the tax or the state subsidies, and then they would leave the state, and people would be unemployed. In Las Cruces, in my district, for example, there were several of those call centers that were just in operation while the state was paying half of the salaries, and once that ran out, then they left the state.
What are some regulations or some things that can be put in place in the future to make sure things like that don't happen?
Well, I think it just becomes a question of making a commitment to bring in companies that are committed to being good corporate citizens, that recognize that we're in a financial crisis and that we really need to share the sacrifice. Right now, I believe that the sacrifice is being laid more heavily on the most vulnerable of our populations. So we need to attract companies that have some kind of a social conscience, that will commit themselves to investing in the state for the benefit of the state as well as for the benefit of their companies. I'm not against companies making profits, but at the same time, there's a lot of money that leaves the states that they do not pay taxes on.
What do you feel some of the best ways to attract good companies to the state are?
Well, I think that one of the things that companies that are looking to relocating to a state such as New Mexico, they would look at the quality of education, the workforce, the quality of life, income tax, personal income tax especially, and corporate income tax is not high on the list as a lot of people try to frame this issue.
We're going to pause for one moment. For those people listening on the radio, you're listening to KRWG 90.7 FM Las Cruces. The show is Your Legislators, and this week's guest is Representative Antonio Lujan from New Mexico's 35th District. Now, Representative Lujan, a thing that's been a sticking point between Governor Susana Martinez and Senate Democrats this year has been the incentive cuts to the film industry. Where did you fall on that issue?
Well, I feel that those incentives are of benefit to some areas of the state, which I feel is good, and I've supported some of the proposals that have been presented before us. I think that there needs to be some tightening up. Senator Keller ran a bill that passed the House last night where they really tighten up on some of the regulations for the film industry, such as actors coming from out of state that earn money in the state having to pay income tax here, keeping track of how many New Mexicans are hired, and just really taking a look at the cost-benefit analysis of this kind of incentive. In the northern part of the state, it has created some kind of a positive economic stimulus. In Las Cruces, I think, if I'm correct, there's been 2 movies that have been filmed there or around that area. Mm-hmm. But I think that with proper controls that could be a viable industry. But it becomes again a question of needing to be watchful for what are called runaway film companies, where they just go from state to state shopping for the best subsidies, and then move on to those states and use up the subsidies, and then move on to other states. And we have to be careful for that, and we need to be protective of our state.
But you would be against a large cut there because it could potentially, send the entire industry away.
I would be opposed to the elimination, or what the governor has proposed of, I think, the 25% cut. I think that the agreement right now is really bordering on whether it's going to be beneficial for the film industries to really invest large sums of money in the state because of the limit. I think that they've capped it at $50 million, and from what I hear from people that know more about this industry than I do, that they feel that that kind of puts a damper on films that would really create larger investments that could be a stimulus for the economy in New Mexico.
Now I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about a bill that you sponsored this year, which would prohibit texting while driving in New Mexico. And I'm just wondering, what got you inspired to sponsor that bill?
Well, I've been on that issue for a number of years. I started with cell phones because I've done considerable research on cell phone use and texting, and excuse me, it's evident the data is out, and show that when one is operating a cell phone, that their capacity to maintain safe driving conditions diminish, and they're the equivalent of 0.08 alcohol level. University of Utah did a study on that on simulators, but there's been a lot of research that has been done on cell phones, and I'd like to point out that there is no difference based on the research between hands-free and handheld cell phones, because it's becomes a function of the brain that's preoccupied in a conversation, where it should be concentrating on the road. The Smith Institute for Driving claims that while a person is driving, one has to make on an average of 30 decisions a minute. It's impossible to be carrying on a conversation and really maintain that level of concentration on the road. Now, texting is very dangerous. Some of the data that are out show that while driving under the influence of alcohol, one is 4 times more likely to be involved in an accident. Texting while driving, one is 8 times more likely to be involved in an accident. So that means that driving while under the influence is rather, texting while driving is twice as dangerous as driving while under the influence.
So you've done quite a bit of research on this to figure out just how dangerous this can be. I'm wondering, have you seen any other states, or do you have any research on any other states that have banned texting while driving? And if you have,
yes.
is it effective? Are accidents and are the roads more safe, I guess, is what I'm trying to ask.
Well, 38% or 38 states have banned texting while driving. I don't know that it's enough time has elapsed to really do a good evaluation of the effects, but I think that just based on the initial research, that it certainly is a step in the right direction. And so I'm pushing for it this year. It's supposed to go before Senate Judiciary today. And if it goes through there, then it should go to the Senate floor. With the time that we have, if I don't get it through Judiciary today, then it'll die on the vine.
So right now is a pretty critical day, deciding if it's going to pass or fail. I mean, if we're going to be the 39th state to have a ban on texting while driving or not.
That's correct.
Okay, and you're also the vice chair of the Energy and National Resources Committee. What is your vision for the state as far as future renewable energy development?
Well, I think that we have a lot of potential for developing renewable energy. However, we also have to really start taking a hard look at conservation. We need to look at how much energy we are wasting. But we have wind, geothermal, solar that's plentiful. We also have natural gas. One of my concerns with natural gas is this whole method of fracking. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but where they inject some chemicals into the ground to break up the rock, and some of those chemicals have a tendency to migrate into the water tables. And there's been documentaries where show that in some areas where fracking has taken place, drinking water, if one puts a cigarette lighter to the water, it'll start on fire.
And there's also been issues with fracking as far as trade secrets and it being difficult to figure out exactly what the chemicals are that are being used to inject into the rocks, right?
That's correct.
Mm-hmm. Do you feel like the oil and gas industry is overregulated or underregulated here in New Mexico?
The oil and gas industry?
Mm-hmm.
I think that right now we should decouple oil and gas. They're different, and by decoupling, I think that it would be better in terms of a revenue source for the state, and we could regulate them individually. And I don't think that they're being overregulated. I support the pit rule, because I think that this is on public lands, and this land belongs to all New Mexicans, not just the oil producers.
Sorry, excuse me, go ahead.
Just that we have a responsibility to protect our public lands.
As the session winds down here, how do you feel the legislative session will be remembered?
From my vantage point, it is certainly one of the hardest and strangest legislative sessions that I've had experienced. Part of it, I think, is a function of a new administration coming in, knowing a lot about campaigning, not knowing that much about governance, and as a result of that, being divisive, having the administration going in and tape recording committee hearings and then picking and choosing snippets from what people say and then using it in the home districts to frame issues. And I haven't seen any of them. I've just from what I've read in the papers. But that is certainly not beneficial or, to me, creative or transformative governance that we need in the state.
All right, well, Representative Lujan, I appreciate you coming on the show today. We'll have to leave it there. Once again, for everybody listening on the radio, you've been listening to Your Legislators with Representative Antonio Lujan from New Mexico's 35th District. Representative Lujan, thanks again.
Thank you very much for having me, and have a good day. And I just want to say hello to all my fellow Las Crucians, and I'll be home soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Your Legislators is a production of KRWG Broadcasting. Copyright New Mexico State University Board of Regents.